Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, because Taylor and I are doing an impromptu live stream at 3 in the afternoon instead of our usual, 9 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. It's also a Monday, so, weird shit. Nobody expected it.
Well, we're also a month later than we intended to do this.
It's true.
But boy, are we a month to the day.
I mean, we both had it read at the beginning of October, or most of it read at the beginning of October.
Yeah, we were both finished by easily the middle of the month. We just couldn't schedule. No. So here we are.
Here we are now. And Gretchen is not here. She was drowning in homework and stuff, which we can't blame her for.
With a book like Jean Le Carré's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, it's something you really can't go halvesies on reading.
No.
And it's a miracle either of us managed to do this. So, but here we are. Did we read it?
I mean, we did read
or did we understand it?
That's the real question. So yes, if you don't know, Bibliomancy for Beginners is our book club. It's usually monthly, but it's also kind of wibbly around that monthly.
Yeah, it's definitely wibbly.
Monthly. We're usually 3 people. Sometimes it's just Taylor and I. Usually those are the boring episodes, but it's going to be a fun one this time.
Mm-hmm.
Be sure to listen through. I say it's boring mostly because Taylor and I often have very similar thoughts and feelings, and Gretchen adds in a very different opinion, which makes the discussions more interesting.
Yeah, so our discussions are, I think, engaging, but a lot more mild-mannered, and it's just a lot of not oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, right. Okay. I thought that too.
Yeah, but this is now up in the admirable company of Rumo and the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges.
The one Laurel K. Hamilton book that I had us do a couple years ago.
Skin Trade, yes. I remember Blowjob Climax as both literal and figurative. It's very memorable.
So good. I'm so sad that Gretchen didn't get to read it because I feel like that would have been a great thing to discuss with her.
What, 40 minutes of her staring in shock at the camera?
Just so yes.
No. Here we are this week, merely to stare in shock at one Western nation selling out its people to Russia.
What?
Trying to get to the bottom of that kerfuffle. And this was... What, did you kind of have, I don't know, not like an out-of-body experience, but weird, lightheaded moments where you're like, oh.
Where the words started swimming a little bit, and you're like,
this is set in the 60s in the Cold War, but okay, these are things.
I think so, yes, but I also just had a mild out-of-body experience the entire time reading this book, because I was it was like if you've ever sat in a lecture where somebody, you've done the readings and you think you have a base knowledge on what's going to go down, and then the teacher starts talking and you're understanding what he's saying, but immediately once that has left, you have no idea what was just said.
Michaela, you are describing moment to moment my experience of seeing Judith Butler talk at Cornell. In that I had literally read her entire book, Gender Trouble, and then when she's talking, I'm like, I still have no idea what words you are saying. How are you? What?
I understand.
How do you operate on such a higher level?
It was English, and each individual word I understood, but these words in this combination, just what?
No, so I will definitely agree, because while I made that connection of Cold War fiction and weird, just irrelevant stuff about our government now, and just echoes totally from that didn't cross my mind until our discussion started today. No, I was out of my mind, drifting away on celestial breezes just because I was so confused the entire time.
Yeah.
'Cause
And for those of
spy
you
fic.
that don't know, we are
Yeah.
talking about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John Le Carre. I picked it in part.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about what this book is.
Well, yeah. Let me talk about why I picked it to start off with. A lot of you know that Gretchen and I have been doing the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge. This is our second year doing it, and one of the requirements this year was an espionage thriller. And now, personally, don't read espionage anything, full stop, ever. Not really. And like, I'm trying to think that like I can't even really attest to having seen a 007 film in the last decade. I think I've seen the older ones, but like haven't seen the newer ones that came out.
They're very different.
Yeah. So
Spy
like
works in different ways.
and
Very, very different.
even then, I think that like I honestly liked Austin Powers more than I liked any 007 film.
I'm not arguing.
They're pretty great. So like I'm not a big fan of the spy genre. So what I did, as a lot of people who you know are reading something in a genre that they don't normally read, is to Google what people think is the best of that genre and be like, okay, at least then I know I'm reading something with literary merit and that a lot of people have enjoyed. And John Le Carre's name is one that like pops up all the time, and Tinker Tailor is like one of his more famous ones, right? If not the most famous one.
Because it also had that film adaptation that was like, I never saw it, but all the conversation around it was like, wow, that was 3 hours in which I had no idea what was happening.
And I mean, the
and
book
really
lived
that
up
became
to that.
clear. Like I really understood that that take.
Yeah. So I picked this because I was like, okay, it's gonna be that. And I also picked it because of, you know, what a lot of people were saying about it was that John Le Carre actually was a spy during the Cold War. So he's writing from experience rather from like an imagined what does it mean to be a spy, which can often make these less fantastic, right? Like nobody really believes that like the 007 type of spy is a real type of spy in the same way that Indiana Jones is not a real archaeologist.
Okay.
Right?
You're
like
really going right for the jugular of nerds, Michaela.
Yeah,
dropping
nerds.
those hard truths.
Did you know that Indiana Jones is not a real archaeologist? Because a real archaeology thing would be super boring, just people poking at dust with like dental toothpicks.
He would never get tenure with that sort of behavior.
It's not even that. He'd be like so dead.
Dead. Can you like be disbarred from archaeology?
Archaeology disbarred from the archaeology department. You haven't brought back anything of import in years. You haven't even written a paper since college. So
it's like the sort of thing through like malpractice will get you that, and it's like James Bond. All you don't spy, you just use gun stuff in your penis, and I guess that's how espionage works.
You haven't brought back any real information from other countries.
Yeah, I think
killed people.
I think my real introduction and touchstone for spy anything has always been the Avengers TV show, which will always be like the silliest thing possible. But they do deal a lot with like spy networks and people undercover, but it's only because they're always dying at the beginning of episodes. And I'm like, oh, this is a book that's actually dealing with like, how do you build those?
Yeah. So that was a large tangent, but it was me discussing.
That's what happens when I talk about things. I'm sorry.
No, I know. It's fine. I went on a tangent technically. The credibility of it, I thought, would add something to the text. It wasn't just be like an action thriller. It would be more like there would be more substance to it. And I think that we went too far in that direction.
Yeah, spoiler-free reading, which amazingly we are still in. Like we haven't given anything away.
No.
just because it's so hard to give anything in this book away. We'd have to repeat things
You need
like
to
facts.
understand what happened in order to give it away.
Yeah, I think my experience is also not really having been a fan of espionage thrillers. We did go a little far in the
We jumped into the deep end.
yeah. Whew, did we?
And I think the other thing is that I think what I was reading the wiki about this is that this was not the first Smiley novel.
I thought it was.
I
I thought it
don't
was the
know.
first of 3.
It's the first of 3 in this line, but I think that there were other novels that included the character before it.
Oh.
Which
First novel in his Carla trilogy, but you're right, it might be. Well, that makes sense because everyone was kind of like introduced, like we should already like
Tinker
have
Tailor is
seen them in their prime.
the 5th Smiley novel. The first one was Call for the Dead, which came out in 1961. This one came out in 1974, which
Maybe we
may
should have read
actually
that.
I know, but it didn't pop up as the best version.
No, I get that.
Right?
I didn't know that. It's not ever pointed out here.
And like it's the first book in a trilogy, which makes you think that like its plot and stuff is irrelevant to the other stuff, but I do think that may have added to our confusion, was that this is like set in a world with characters that have already been firmly established in other books. And for us it was just like getting thrown a bunch of code names, a bunch of like real names, a bunch of relationships that like we didn't quite understand. And then their discussion of the shakiness of their own understanding of those relationships. And
it does really lead to what I think was the most unsatisfying part of this, and this isn't really a spoiler, in that we were introduced to characters and we started getting ideas about how their sort of story would go about, or the sort of arcs to see. Like, the first chapter, we get introduced to this character who seems to have like a troubled past. He's like totally like beaten up like a 12-year-old tomcat. And all these things are kind of set up, and then he drops out of the story until the very end and never really does very much.
Yeah.
So had I known that these characters have already been past their prime in actual novels, and then moved into this stage of their lives, I think it would have been a much more satisfying examination on all these things that have happened in them, as opposed to just trying to piece together the very unsatisfying lives of these characters.
Wait, what?
And then experience it all in a book.
Yeah. So that's that. And I think that we've both pretty much said like our opinions of the book itself. Do you have anything else that you want to like say, like spoiler-free opinions about it?
I don't think we can get much further without at least talking about plot.
Okay.
So
that's fine. Then yes, both of us, I'm going to put this here. Both of us felt that it was very smart and very well done, but went over our heads. And it may just be that we need to read it again, having a better understanding of things, or it may just be that because we started with the 5th Smiley novel, that if you had started at the beginning and got to this point, it would not have been such a difficult, just comprehension-wise type thing.
But if complicated spy novels are something you're familiar with, you wouldn't really go wrong hopping into this.
Yeah, no, not at all. Okay, so if you haven't read the book or haven't seen the movie and you want to, and you don't want to hear us talking about sort of the plot elements past like just the opening structure, please go away and come back and join us if you're one of those.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying, maybe we should give like the briefest rundown, because we haven't really talked about it. It's just a guy is brought back onto the British special intelligence spy networks to look into some sort of mole issue where information has been given to the Russians, and they're realizing this has kind of been unchecked for maybe a long time. They're trying to figure it out by looking at past events, who this is.
Yep. Who the mole is. Gotta find that mole. Which is, not an uncommon spy plot.
The way it's done in this is unique, though, in that I don't think a single gun is fired in that is not a flashback.
True. Actually, yeah, I think that is true. Yeah. This is like
All
if
brain spy.
I mean it's brain spy, but it's also like if somebody decided that for the next 007 film, one of the characters that shows up in all of the other 007 films was a mole, but rather than like having an action adventure to catch that guy, you just rewatch old scenes from the old 007 films with like a filter over it. That's sort of how it feels a little bit.
That or just have James Bond like reading through a folder for 2 hours.
File folder and like
Just one
highlighting
interrupted
things,
shot.
writing notes in the margins.
Occasionally getting another cup of tea.
We're sort of making fun of this book, but it was good. But yeah, that's more or less what this book waters down to.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to read it, feel free to. If you want to see the movie, because you don't want to read the whole book, because we mentioned that it was a slog, but you kind of want to know what we're talking about, you can do that too. If you don't care about spoilers, or if you're okay with being as confused about what's going on as we were, please feel free to join us in this discussion. Either there's a video, which you can go and leave comments on, you can tweet at us or at the book club itself. I don't think I've mentioned this on air, but I have set up a podcast now, which you can get on iTunes or whichever podcasting app/site that you prefer to use, because there's an RSS feed and everything. And I have been posting the backlists of this season's book clubs. I don't know whether or not I'm going to go back and do some like older book clubs into the podcast format.
Maybe just the ones we like.
Possibly the ones that we're sort of proud of, but obviously the video archive still exists. So if you wanted to hear about any of that, that exists as well. And again, there's also our Goodreads page, which nobody uses but us, and it would be great if people wanted to start having discussions about things there as well. But it's an option. There's these social places where you can add to the discussion, especially with something like this, where you might be shouting, "You guys are so dumb. This book was so easy to understand. I don't know what your problem is."
That's what I was feeling for the first 80 pages of this book. I'm like, oh, this is easy. Yeah. All right.
Hard right turn.
Are those all of the
I think that's all of the things. So if you have a spoil that you want to shout out right now, go for it.
I don't even know how to spoil this book right now. It was a guy. No. Okay. So how do we want to get into this?
I see. This is the problem. Like, let me do a thing real quick.
We both need to just suddenly bring up the Wikipedia pages so we know how to talk. Like, what are people's
so that I don't say something wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is right. This is what I'm remembering.
Uh-huh. Yes. Okay. So I guess we could start with George Smiley. The
kind of anti-spy.
Yeah.
So it's like Jean Le Carre had like watched like the early James Bond movies, and then when he sat down to write his book, he's like, well, I don't want a tall, suave man who's good and on his feet. I want a frumpy little man who enjoys German poetry.
I want Napoleon. He's an interesting character. I do think that I found him intriguing in a lot of ways, and I also like him sort of as a foil to James Bond, right? Like if you were to recruit people to be spies, why would you choose somebody as conspicuous as tall, dark, and handsome and not the guy that looks like the accountant to do
Mhm.
this. Like
Who
like
would
obviously,
naturally be going around European intellectual locations and just like talking to young, clever people,
yeah,
kind of like bringing them into a network.
yeah,
So those were some of the most interesting parts in the book,
yeah.
which is kind of like dealing with these elements where it's not quite so inward facing as trying to read through all these different operations that have been happening and get into that.
I mean, yes, those had not more action per se, but more action. I don't know.
Yeah. No. But I also bring up that because it's hard for me to say much about George Smiley
And I
because
think
he's
that's
just
also purposeful.
yeah, because he's just kind of like the consummate professional, but in like a really boring way. Like he's not those cold, unfeeling hitmen who just do the job. It's just like he's gonna sit down, he's gonna read the file, and he's gonna be damn meticulous about it, and just doesn't like talking to people. Like,
I
okay, like, it is fun, it is interesting, but so much of what we've been prepared to experience for spy drama is like a lot of high tension conversation.
and that's not what
And this is very low tension conversation.
with like secret high tension question mark hidden underneath where like you're looking for it like it's supposed to be there and it's not.
Yeah, because and I think that might be because we spent so much time trying to play catch up for terminology, code names, what all these people are doing in their various walks of life. So, like half the people they talk to in this book have been retired from the force for a while, and so I'm just like just trying to figure out what any of them are doing.
Right. and
So
and again, I think that might be another point where having read the earlier books might have been helpful because somebody would pop up and you'd be like, oh, that's the guy that did XYZ, and then when they go over that person
mhm.
in this book, you're like, ooh, maybe he did fuck up because of something else
Yeah.
that they
And
did.
it wouldn't have just they wouldn't have blended together so much, which is really my main issue as I got further and further into this book.
Mm.
So when I'm trying to figure out what's going on, who I had to keep a constant character list open, not because that's like some outrageous thing, but just because like Toby Esterhaus, um, whatever Hayden is, and like Guillaume, and all these people. I'm trying to remember which ones I'm supposed to like and how all of these middle-aged white men are supposed to be differentiated.
Yeah,
They just kept talking about one of their Scottish brogues and one of them used to be a Hungarian or something. I'm like,
polyglot.
this is just difficult to parse a lot of the time because all their actions, their experiences. So yeah, I was just confused. My experience was being confused.
Yes. um and I don't know, I think that came about in, not to say in the language choices, but in the trying to make it realistic that if it was an ex spy trying to look at his old coworkers or old peers, they would be using these code words because that was just their like lexicon,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Like it's not meant to confuse us, but it is by its nature meant to confuse outsiders, and
yeah,
the readers are all outsiders, right?
yes, and it doesn't waste its time or it doesn't break immersion by holding your hand through any of it. It
Right.
never takes a step back to walk you through a conclusion. If someone has said something and a character understands it and understands the implications of it, the book is not going to slow down and say, "Well, hey there, kiddo. Did you get all that?"
It's just in case. Here's a footnote. No, but I guess I would say that I have read books that do that, right? Where
Mhm.
characters are in their own world and they're having discussions within their world where they are understanding what's going on, and I, as a reader, either have to simply accept what's going on and either like choose to add my own meaning or not, or will slowly become aware of it as the book goes on. But with this one, I didn't feel that, I guess I would say. And I
Okay.
don't think it's like against his writing. Like, it's not that he wrote it poorly. I think it literally is just that like it was too complicated for my brain. Like, that's usually an element of another book. Like, there's other things to grasp on, whereas this whole book was so centered around that adding this confusion with the language just made it more of a slog and more of a struggle in
Yeah.
general.
And I don't want to spend all of our time just rephrasing how confused we were.
Guys, we were
But
confused. Did you know that we
yes,
were confused?
the first part of it is we didn't realize we were book 5 in this character's story because we were starting a trilogy.
Yeah.
And normally you don't get a trilogy 5 books into a series. So that was just a little misleading for our own experience.
Yes.
And 2, the whole book is written and built like a math equation. And that's rough to get into.
Yeah. So, okay. To
Yes.
prevent that in other readers, if you go to the Wikipedia page, there is literally a whole table on there that has all of the jargon. And it explains what that means and what it means to the characters. And like some of it I picked up pretty quickly. Like circus. I understood what the
Yeah.
circus was. But
But
like other
things like
things,
witchcraft sometimes meant one thing and sometimes felt like it meant another thing. So no,
yeah.
yeah, very useful. At which point in the book, Michaela, did you just look up the plot summary?
I finished it and then looked up the plot summary. I was like, no, I'm gonna read this. And then I read the plot summary and I went, okay, technically this did happen, but I did not see it.
I got to page 200 and I didn't mean to read to the end of the plot summary. They tossed in the reveal of uh, Hayden having been recruited years before, so it's not just him funneling info out of Russia. It's actually been him, like, giving false or unimportant Russian information, then sending off the Brit stuff.
Yeah.
I got that a little earlier than I intended, but that still meant I was spending like 200 pages trying to figure out how that was the case. So it didn't really spoil the experience for me. It just kind of like
Okay.
it allowed me to focus on things in a way that I needed to.
Do you think that that was helpful for you?
For
And
me, that was vital to the
okay, okay.
experience. But it's also, I was mentioning before we started, um, page 80 through around 180 to 200 was like the densest block of let's just read through old files. It's before he even was really interviewing people. And Le Carre is pretty good with dialogue, I think.
Mm.
Like, he makes compelling conversation, and the stories, like Ricky Tarr at the beginning talking about his affair with this Russian spy, and they're trying to communicate undercover and trying to get her to defect,
Mm.
as well as Jim Prideaux talking about his betrayal in that mission in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of Czechoslovakia, or I guess the Czech Republic at this point. Um, that was all very interesting. And he also knows when he's been using some like sort of very affected um sort of like the guy with the heavy accent where he'd be leaving out articles and everything, and it's like very clearly he's not a native speaker. Le Carre also knows when to um move into recounted info
Right.
so as not to just overwhelm you. And so that was all very compelling, but until about page 200 it was just so dense and so boring that I needed the plot summary, and then once I had it, everything just went a lot more smoothly, and I could actually get into the story a little more. So
Okay.
it was very important for me.
That I think also would have helped me, right? Like, rather than feeling like it spoils the big reveal at the end, it more so makes you feel like It gives you an anchor, right? Like, and grounds you.
Yeah, it allows you to keep up with the characters,
That's fair.
which for me was a victory.
Yeah.
So, because even in that very climactic scene at the end where he's like up in the room listening to this conversation until they reveal that they have in fact been working together and all that he suspected is actually true, like I was like, if I hadn't read this, I would be very much at sea right now. And yeah, that was nice to actually experience the climax of the book as like an aware reader.
Yeah. As someone who was, I don't want to say, so I made a video a while back where I talked about thrillers and how there's like 4 different ways that the endings can work. You
Mhm.
see the ending coming, and like you're proud of that fact because it was difficult to parse out. You see the ending coming and you're upset about that fact because it was too obvious. You don't
Mhm.
see the ending coming, and it's like a out of left field type of ending, and you don't see the ending coming, but you're
Okay.
okay with that because you can see that it was coded in there and you just didn't catch it
A
in
sort of
time.
Agatha Christie thing.
Right. And I think that this one for me fell into that fourth category of I didn't see the ending coming, but it wasn't because it was obvious, or it wasn't because it came out of left field. It was because I didn't put the clues together in time, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Which I think is better than the other you didn't see it coming type thing where like it's like shock and awe, it was him the whole time. And you're
The
like, what?
Stephen Moffat form of
Yeah.
mystery.
Yeah. And you're
Of
just like confused and upset
yeah,
about it. This
I
was
agree entirely
definitely like there was a through
because
line that if
mhm,
you were smart enough you and or had like read the other novels or whatever it is, you could follow it along and see it coming.
you could start to have suspicions at the very least.
Right.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say that not having that structure or not having that focus was a negative in the same
Okay.
way, right? Like, because it still didn't feel like it came out of left field. I still felt like they came to logical conclusions and it made sense. I just also did not understand how they got there.
That's fine. I'm glad I'd somewhere in the middle. But no, what we can definitely agree is that it was impressively constructed.
Yes.
And it does take all of these very complex scenarios and ideas and manages to piece together into a very satisfying reveal.
Right.
So that was cool. What I do want to talk about, and I think I was getting at earlier with the
Mm.
kind of talk about how I expected Jim Prideaux to be a little more important and fun.
Mhm.
And I guess, okay, well, if he's been in 5 stories already, we already got to see him be a cool, interesting person. But the scenes at the boarding school where he's working kind of undercover and like starting this friendship with this student who's very much an outcast, those were the most like one digestible and coherent things, possibly just because it's from an unaware observer
Mm.
and who's very innocent, but is kind of like basically at my level in this
Yeah.
experience. But it wound up being such a small portion of the text that never goes anywhere. Or at least it concludes and it has an arc, but it doesn't actually play into anything that I was hoping for, of being like, I thought he'd be the main character, but no, we get George Smiley. He doesn't really have the same charisma or presence that Jim Prideaux has, that's kind of
Right.
carrying through like, oh, how does he have all of these injuries? Where did it all come from? But it's like when we finally get that payoff of explanation, it's doesn't go anywhere. It's just a stepping stone and this other thing.
I
So
mean,
I felt like I just wasn't reading the story I wanted.
that's fair. And I think I read, I don't know if it was on the wiki page or like in the biography of the author, like a forward or afterward in my copy of it, that
Hmm.
he wasn't expecting this book to be a George Smiley book. Like he didn't initially write it to be
Hmm.
that, and he later decided to add Smiley in, and Smiley became sort of the linchpin in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that like opening sort of shows that the most, because it feels like this is supposed to be a Jim Prideaux novel
And it
rather
has a
than a
very
George
different
Smiley novel.
tone
Yeah.
than everything else. So those chapters just carried a very different sort of narrative. And I like his original idea better, it seems.
I think so too, but I also don't know what that book would have been, right? Like I'm not entirely
Mm-hmm.
certain how it would have been structured otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, because it's also just that, I don't know, the whole plot is just not the one I was expecting of let's look at the records of this 20-year-old event to try to figure out who's a spy.
right.
And that's just not what I was expecting.
And some people really like that fact about this book, actually, that
Hmm.
it's not what they were expecting. And um, I don't know. I did pick this book because I didn't want the action
Hmm. Yeah.
book, like mildly misogynistic, overly sexualized protagonist. I picked it because this was supposed to be a more realistic, down to earth story. And I'm not saying that Jim Prideaux would have been that, like his story would
Yeah.
have been that, but I do think that he is the like bits of his story that we got definitely were more palatable.
I think really there is a middle ground that I could see that
Mm,
obviously don't really factor into what this book became. In that, like I said, Jim Prideaux and Ricky Tarr's stories of here I am going on a mission, or here's me in a dangerous location trying to accomplish my goals. Is I don't necessarily need a car chase or a shooting match, but those were very high tension
because you know that they could
parts of
get
story.
caught and die at
Yeah.
any moment. Yeah.
And so it's a lot of detail. It's a lot of detail I know how I'm supposed to be looking for because of how it's narrated,
Yep.
which is a little more of an engaging narratorial voice than George Smiley and all those parts. So I was where we get to see travel and we get to see these locations and we get to be a little more embroiled in the action rather than reflecting calmly upon the action.
Mm.
Wow, and there were like very, very few moments in the present day. Like, I think it was um, Guillaume who was Smiley's kind of second, um, his assistant in this research, when he was sneaking into their records at the circus to try to swap out the file for a fake one so they could see these without alerting people to it. That was really cool.
Yeah.
That was fun. So I just wanted a little more of those moments
Right.
to kind of, you know, give me the lively experience that I felt I deserved here.
Perhaps I should have chosen whatever that first book was. I've already
I'd be
forgotten the title
curious.
of. And
Yeah, because
I guess
I'm
that's
still down with
something
a frumpy spy, but
I guess that's something that we could talk about is whether we would read another John Le Carre book. And I guess it would be interesting to see reading another one if it we had a different experience because we've read this one and understand the jargon now and sort of
mhm.
understand the characters better at the end, going to a different one and reading it, if that would make it more engaging because we don't have to spend so much mental energy on other things.
What do you think?
I mean, I would read another one. I wouldn't
Mhm.
read it like when I feel like I need to have other things to read. Like I would want to read it when I'm like on vacation and can give it attention, right? Like
Okay, yeah.
I definitely feel like I need to give it its own space and attention. But I do feel like a lot of my discomfort with this book came from my lack of understanding. And perhaps if I read another one and I understood it better, I would be able to revisit this and have a different opinion of it, if that makes sense.
It does. There were definitely a lot of filters between us and I guess this book as it was intended,
Mm.
as best as we can understand, to be read and appreciated. And, like one or two things that like kind of distance us and make it unfamiliar can be dealt with. There was a bit hard. I would absolutely read another John le Carré novel,
Right.
but I would definitely screen it in advance, probably from someone who has read a number of them, so I
Okay.
can make sure I'm getting a little bit more balance of the characters or story I'm looking for.
Okay. Do
So I
you
wouldn't
like?
just hop blind into like even the first George Smiley novel. I might say, okay, I like how he puts a story together. Like I trust his ability to do this. I just want to make sure I'm going into a story that's closer to my own
So do you mean like
interest.
having the Wikipedia like
I
description
wouldn't want
of
it
the plot?
spoiled. Jeez. Okay, I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want it necessarily given away to me. I just want someone who has said, "Okay, here are things you're looking for in a
Right.
spy novel," like what we were talking about. Like when I say these were the parts of Tinker Tailor that most appealed to me.
Right. Right. Right.
What would you recommend so I can get a little bit more of that? And that's
That's
how I would do this.
that's fair. Going to somebody who's read a lot and have
Mhm.
that person be like, so if you liked these elements, this one
Mhm.
has the most of those and is the
Yeah,
best in
and
that
that's
way.
what librarians literally exist to do. They love that shit.
I love that. I love that stuff as a blogger. That's my favorite thing. So yeah, no, I completely understand that
Mhm.
idea too. Yeah. That might change things too, is to talk to somebody and give them like your specific John le Carré novel. Like this is the one that Taylor would enjoy.
Yeah, like you get those websites that are like, oh, what music are you listening to? Here's the perfect mixed drink for you. I want that, but for John le Carré. Or like Stephen King, those authors that just have like a massive oeuvre of like a lot of things that are sort of similar in feeling, but like a lot of different elements. So you're like, okay, well, I want one where, uh, you know, there isn't body horror, and no dogs die. Give me the Stephen King.
11/22/63.
Yeah, but like, stay away from Pet Cemetery.
No Cujo for you.
Stay out of those.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. And I think that's about all I have to discuss on this one. Is there anything else that you really want to touch on?
I want to watch the movie now. Like, I
That's
want to see how a confusing book was condensed into 3 hours with
and
Gary Oldman.
and would it be as confusing having read the book? Would it no longer be a confusing film?
Yeah, I don't know.
Plot twist.
It's something worth checking out.
Yeah, that might be something that we can do at some point in the future. Have a weird little.
Because, I mean, I think it was a critically appreciated film, so it would be interesting to see what elements of this story they latched onto.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
And whether it would literally be the antithesis of a James Bond novel or a James Bond movie or somewhere in between.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's my all I have to say. Um,
On this one.
I think so.
Okay. Our next book, which we will be talking about hopefully at the end of November, Gretchen has a Thanksgiving break, which she's planning to read not only this next book, but the following book so that she can take part in both of these discussions that are coming up for the end of the year. The first one being Illumine, which is written by Jay Kristoff and one other person whose name I'm forgetting.
It is Amy Kaufman.
Amy Kaufman, and we have read one other Jay Kristoff book this year so far. So if you want to see our discussion on Nevernight,
on Nevernight, yeah, I
uh,
definitely also recommend Illumini, having read the first part of it. So if you're seeing this, you're not sure if you want to go for it. Jay Kristoff is a great author that we've really enjoyed, and this is a fun, very different story than we've ever done.
And it's technically a YA title, so it should
It
be
is.
a lot less mentally strenuous than John le Carré.
Plus, it's really well designed. Like, it's incredibly creatively done and page layouts and structure. So,
Do you want to show some of those to the camera for
oh
the
geez,
two?
how do I even like? a lot of it's logs.
Hashtag postmodernism.
Yeah, especially because I'm in a publishing class that's dealing with book design and layout and all of those efforts. And this was lovingly crafted and also expensive for all these different sorts of pages.
Yeah.
So they had to care about this book and think it would be worth their time.
That's fair.
Shit gets weird and geez, this is.
Stop spoiling yourself.
I don't know what a heart rate monitor of binary code is going to tell me, but it's they are becoming the spaceship, and that
they are the spaceship.
yes, this is
And/or the spaceship
House of
turns
Leaves in space.
into a smart home type situation. Do you remember that, like
I do remember Smart Home.
early 2000s / late 90s Disney movies?
Yes, but
Classic.
here we get teens all hyped up on hormones in space with high stakes and possibly a deadly plague
Ooh,
as well as like just spaceship flight and fear. And
science fiction.
I think they're out to kill capitalism.
Whoa,
I think that's
capitalism.
happening too.
But that's us.
They are fighting the physical embodiment of capitalism.
Okay. All right. Well, that'll be interesting. That'll be an interesting one to look at and talk about. So
Should be wild. Gretchen chose interestingly.
she did, and I have yet to start it because it's in one of the many boxes of books that I moved that I have not opened because I don't have bookcases to put them in.
You keep looking like 5 feet above you into the corner of the room, so I'm just anticipating your fear of like having to move one box and they all just topple onto you.
What, like you like may not be able to tell is that this is a stack of like 6 boxes high that goes like mostly to the ceiling and is the entire run of this wall.
That's yes.
Those are my books.
Yes. All right.
Fun.
Yeah.
We'll
Tinker
talk to you
Tailor's
guys.
Ultra Spy.
Yeah, we'll talk to you guys next month. I hope you guys are having a good time. If you have anything that you want to chat with either of us about, you can find us on the interwebs. I generally link our socials in the description box of the video. I should probably, I think I do it in the description of the podcast as well, but I'm not positive on that because those have.
You want to shout it out?
Sure.
It's not like anyone listens to the end.
I'm at Pied Piper Calls everywhere.
And so. I'm at E.T. Greenwood on Twitter, I think. Yes, I am. I always need to check. But it's there.
There. And he's at Talade on the Twitch.
Yeah, but my internet here has been pretty inconsistent, so I haven't been able to stream.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I know that you were doing it pretty consistently for a while there, though. So.
I was, but then another person moved in, I think, and now it just hiccups.
Rude.
So I haven't been able to. Anyway, I think that's all of it.
Yep. All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next month. I'll see you sooner rather than later on the YouTube channel. And again, the podcast will be getting sort of the backlogs of this year for the moment. And then I might go back and add in a couple of favorites through our older exploits. Ooh. All right. Bye.
Bye.